then we would love for you to add your information or update your information to that coalition roster on our website. And that website's also where you can sign up for a newsletter. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can sign up for the newsletter, which you may already receive it because you found this training, but just in case. And one last thing. Before we get started, I just want to introduce the other members of the CHTI team. So I see we've got Gina Rodriguez in the house. Want to say hi, Gina?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Very excited to see you all here today and to see some familiar faces. My name is Gina Rodriguez. I use the she, her pronouns. I serve as the Associate Director for the Community Health Training Institute and have been I think now probably the longest team member at this point as folks move in and out. So I'm really excited for today's training and invite you all to participate and engage today. Bring your experiences and your thoughts and questions into this space. And yeah, if you have anything that you need, feel free to hit us up in the chat box, but I'll pass it to Eli to say hello.
Thanks, Gina. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eli Adler-Cohen, and I'm an administrative coordinator here at Health Resources in Action, serving on the Community Health Training Institute team. I think I'm the newest member of the team, so it's funny that Gina and I are going back to back, but super excited to be here. Excited for just an awesome, engaging 3 hours of content and sharing ideas and talking and learning. So happy to be here and welcome. And I think I'll throw it over to Gracie.
Thanks, Eli. Hi, folks. My name's Gracie Rolfe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm not technically on the Community Health Training Institute, but I am a senior manager in the Training and Capacity Building Department at Health Resources in Action. I'm going to be one of your facilitators today, along with my wonderful friend and colleague, Jasper Lee. And really excited for the content of this training. This is sort of the second iteration of this training topic that we will have done. We did a 2-day training last year on this same topic. And really excited, I think this is like a different take or a different approach on this type of topic. And I'll just be upfront and say that I think this is really more about you all and reflecting on, our own assumptions, our own biases about queer people, trans people, LGBTQ issues, gender, like what we separate based on gender. And so I'm just going to challenge you all to really lean into your own reflections and your own assumptions. And hopefully we all walk away learning something new. I'm also a queer person, so I feel like this really helped inform the content of this training that I wrote with Jasper, and really excited to be here with you all today. And I'll hand it off to Jasper.
Oh, hey, hi, hello, folks. My name's Jasper. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm also a member of our lovely CHTI team, and will be helping co-facilitate with Gracie today. And also, a huge +1, I think, to what you've sort of previewed for us today, Gracie. This is definitely not a training where we're just going to regurgitate to you all sort of this alphabet soup of LGBTQ plus identities. We're going to make, you all do some deep reflecting work, and I think really start to sort of tease apart what are some of those internalized pieces, right, that we all sort of just take for granted living in, right, a really homophobic, transphobic, heteronormative society, right? So we're going to start to, I think, do a little unpacking of that today, so that this way we can sort of leave this space, hopefully feeling more empowered with some tools to be able to help counteract those. And I believe I'm passing it back to you, Gracie, just for some quick Zoom pieces.
Awesome. Thanks, Jasper. And thanks, CHTI folks, for hosting us and letting me crash. It's always fun getting to do a training through CHTI. So just want to quickly orient folks to our Zoom platform. This might look familiar at this point to people, but to some folks it might be newer, but just wanted to orient folks one more time. So your stop video button and your mute button should be in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We do ask that folks stay muted if they aren't speaking, just because we tend to pick up on a lot of background noise as facilitators. We have the power and control to mute people. So if I hear a crying baby or a barking dog and I mute you, don't take it personally. It's just we don't want to sort of interrupt the flow and the content of the training. But our trainings are really interactive, friends. Like, I don't want to talk at you for 3 hours, and I'm sure you don't want that either. We really believe deeply in the principles of adult learning theory, meaning that adults really like learn and thrive in different ways. So we're going to be doing some brainstorms, some breakout rooms, some reflections, and really welcome your voices and your experiences in this space. So if you feel moved to unmute and share or push back on an idea or ask questions, please hit the unmute button. That's what it's there for, but we just ask that folks stay muted if they aren't speaking. I see a lot of beautiful faces on camera, and I would encourage folks to have their cameras on if you have the capacity to do so. If you have a camera that works and you feel like you can have it on, we think this really helps to foster engagement and participation. We know it's quite a large group today, but if you can't have your camera on for whatever reason, we know that folks have a lot going on if you're working from home, or if you don't have a camera that works, or if you're in a bit busy office space, we totally get it. But if you do have the capacity to have it on, certainly encourage you to do so. Your chat box should be, or chat bubble should be in the kind of middle bottom part of your bar. And we want that to feel accessible to folks as well. And we'll have folks introduce themselves using the chat box in just a minute. But again, want that to feel accessible to folks. So if you want to answer questions or post thoughts or drop resources in the chat box, I think that's a really beautiful place for that to facilitate those kind of activities. Last thing I want to orient folks to is this function called annotate, which we might be using a few times throughout this training. Sadly, Jasper and I are not facilitating with you all in like a brick and mortar in-person space. So I don't have flip chart. I don't have a whiteboard that I could write up on. But Zoom is pretty cool and allows us to use different features that can actually allow us to write up on a shared screen. So if you go to the top of your screen, you should see a green bar that says you are viewing Gracie Rolfe's screen. And to the right of that, there should be a button that says view options. And when you click on view options, I believe the third option down should say annotate. And when you click on annotate, there will be a toolbar that kind of pops up at the top of your screen. And there's many different functions like stamp, draw, text. I see someone's drawing already. We're getting a hang of it. Erase, undo. We're primarily just going to be using the text function today to sort of capture some ideas. Eli is also going to assist with us as well in sort of capturing and annotating up. But just wanted to orient folks to that so that they're aware of where it is. Yeah, I see like stars coming in, shapes coming in, beautiful. So seems like we've got a grip on annotate. Last thing I want to orient folks to before we have folks introduce themselves using the chat box. If you go to your little display screen, which should sort of be on the right-hand side of your screen, your own little thumbnail that has your picture and your name. If you right-click on that, or if you click the 3 dots that appear in the top left-hand corner of your display screen, there should be a drop-down menu that appears, and the last option down should say rename. And if you click rename, you're actually able to rename yourself. And we ask that folks do this to display the name that they go by, that you want us to refer to you as. It can also be really helpful if you feel comfortable doing so. If you also want to put your pronouns there, you can see that Jasper and I have modeled this for the group as well. This is just really helpful for us as facilitators, so we know how to properly refer to folks, that we're not making any assumptions about folks. See, assumptions, there's like something that's tethering all of this together. So once you do that, once you rename yourself with your name and your pronouns, we would love it if folks could introduce themselves via the chat. And I'll actually, let me skip ahead for now, and then I'll go back to the other Zoom stuff in just a little bit. But if folks want to introduce themselves using the chat, would love to know who you are, what program you're from, or what organization you're in, and your pronouns. Again, you can share those if you feel comfortable doing so. And then our little icebreaker question. What is the hope? I know, we're like 2 years into the new year, right? And maybe some of us made resolutions. I don't want to use the term resolutions because I think it's a bunch of BS, but what's the hope that you have for yourself in this new year, right? We're at the beginning of this year. What's one hope that you have for yourself in this year? And I'll do my best to narrate those as they come through. So welcome, Glenda. We've got welcome, Hope, Director of Education and Training, Equity in Action Project in Michigan, welcome Tia. Home City Development, welcome Katie. In Peabody, Kayla. Public Health District in Washington, welcome Mariana. Welcome Jalen, we've got Anna, we've got Joy. At Casa Esperanza, welcome Joy, welcome Claudia. Welcome Tara, welcome Glenda, Migrant Health Center. We've got Karen on Cape Cod and the Islands, welcome Stephanie. We've got Michaela, welcome Tia, welcome Stormy, welcome Takara, welcome Rudo. We've got Julie, we've got Paige, welcome Erica, welcome Jen in Roxbury, Tenants of Harvard. Welcome Brianna on the Cape as well, Christine. Welcome Audrey, Wildflower Inc. in Boston. Welcome Nico, Jump in Massachusetts. We've got Marie, Berkshire Regional Planning Commission in Pittsfield. Welcome Valentina. We've got Shazia. Welcome Melissa. Welcome Owen. Welcome Gina. We've got Rudo. We've got Stephanie, Tamaki, Renelle, Kristen, Rebecca. I feel like we've got representation east to west, north to south, outside of the state of Massachusetts as well. And I see a multitude of different sort of sectors of work being represented as well. So thanks folks so much. Definitely feel free to keep introducing yourself in the chat if you haven't done so already. I didn't see too many people share what their hope is for themselves for the new year, but we can continue to ponder that. And let me just back up a couple slides to orient folks. Also, we're going to be using breakout rooms today. There's nothing that you have to do. You will be whisked away automatically by Eli's Zoom tech and Zoom wizardry. But you have all the same functions that you have now as when you're in a breakout room. You can share your screen, you can mute yourself, you can come off camera. There's also an ask for help button if you're ever having any trouble in a breakout room, and you can always feel free to click that, and one of us will hopefully come to your rescue if you need it. And also, I'm not too sure if I saw any like duplicated users or folks joining from or a phone number, but there's also some information on how you can join using audio or connecting and joining your audio with your computer. And again, you can feel free to direct any direct questions to Eli, who can hopefully troubleshoot any tech issues that folks might be having. All right, we've introduced ourselves, and there are a few more that came in. We've got Jacqueline and Joy and Valentina. Welcome, folks. Want to look at some group agreements now, and then we'll kind of run over our agenda and objectives, and then we'll get into our first activity. But group agreements, they're not rules, but think of them as like guidelines for how we want to exist in this virtual space together between now and 1 p.m. So we're going to be together for a good chunk of time. And yeah, this is just how we want to exist in this virtual space. We are quite a large group, and we think it's important to have group agreements, whether we're in person, whether we're online. So I'll run quickly through these. We've talked already about our cameras, having those on if we have the capacity to have those on. Do ask that folks stay muted if they aren't speaking, but hit the unmute button if you feel moved and called to do so. I'm looking at the third one down, the third group agreement that says, take space, make space. Is there a brave and lovely soul that wants to come off mute and share what they think take space, make space means? What is that group agreement referring to?
Hi, Joy here.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Joy.
I have heard that described as if you're somebody who frequently takes up a lot of space, step back to make space for other people. And if you're somebody who's habitually quiet, push yourself forward to take space and share your opinion with the group.
Right on, Joy. I don't think I could have said it any better than you, but yeah, it's no fun when like one or two people monopolize a 3-hour training, right? I don't want that for y'all. I don't want that for me and Jasper as facilitators as well. So yeah, I challenge all of you. If you speak up a lot, make some space for others. And if you tend to be on the quieter side, be brave and take up some space. So we're kind of all sharing that airtime equally. Respect others and also yourself. I think, speaks for itself. Take care of yourself. We might be challenged on some of the ideas that were presented to today. We may see ourselves reflected in some of these ideas and frameworks that Jasper and I are going to share with you, and just encourage you to take care of yourself, Again, we will be taking a break that will come right around halfway, just after 11 o'clock today. But, you know, feel free, like if you need to get up, if you need to use the restroom, if you need to step away for a few minutes, you all have the agency and autonomy to do whatever feels good for you. And lastly, the stories stay, but we want the lessons to leave, right? This is a way of saying confidentiality. What the sort of really personal identifying information we want to leave in this training, but the lessons and learnings we want to take with us, right, to incorporate into our work. So this is just a way of honoring people's confidentiality. So these are our group agreements, folks. We are happy to add to these, but wondering how these are landing, if these are feeling good, like maybe give me a physical thumbs up, or if you have your camera off, you can definitely feel free to give me the little emoji thumbs up, which is cute, like that. But how are these landing for folks? Give me a thumbs up if these feel good. I see some hearts, I see a lot of thumbs, a smattering of thumbs. Okay, beautiful. And we are always happy to revisit these and add to anything if folks feel called to do so. So we'll rock with these until 1 p.m. today. So thanks everyone for agreeing to our group agreements. We're quickly going to look at our agenda and our objectives, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jasper, who's going to take us through the first part. We're just wrapping up our welcome and introductions right now. Hopefully you all know who we are at this point. It was lovely to get a sense of who folks are in the chat. So we're just wrapping up these welcome and intros right now. We're then going to we're going to throw you in the deep end. Okay, we're doing like a cold plunge with a reflection, first of all, to really reflect on some things around gender identity, around societally what we deem, how we separate things based on gender. And Jasper's going to take us through that. Jasper's also going to take us through a really awesome sort of historical piece and lesson around LGBTQ issues and these concepts of gender, like where they come from. We're then going to take a break. Again, our break will come, I think, right around 11:10 or 11:20. We'll come back from that 10-minute break, and we're going to dive into a sort of take on the alphabet soup, if you will, but it's not actually going to be the alphabet soup, but we're going to think about language and defining terms. We're going to think about some theory related to concepts of gender and gender identity. We've got a few more sort of reflective activities thrown in there. And then we'll close, and we promise to have you out of here by 1 p.m. today. So that's our agenda. And then in terms of the learning objectives, so this is what we hope folks walk away having done by 1 p.m. today. So hopefully folks will learn tools to examine their unconscious biases or assumptions regarding people with historically marginalized identities and how to address those assumptions moving forward. We'll understand how to advocate for LGBTQ communities without speaking for them. That's a really, really clear distinction that Jasper and I wanted to make. And then finally, right, this is about y'all delving into some heart work to find our ways to genuine allyship. If you do your own work, if you take time to really reflect and unpack where a lot of your assumptions and ideas come from, a lot of what Jasper and I are going to share with you will actually make a lot of sense, right? But if we don't take the time to do that work first, it's probably not going to land for us, which is why we're giving you plenty of opportunities to really reflect and do some deep reflection in this training. So I know I've talked a lot. Let me pause here, see if there are any questions, any thoughts, anything that I can clarify before we dive in. Jasper, anything you want to add before I pass it off to you?
Nope.
Beautiful.
Did great.
All right. Thank you. So friends, I'll take the silence as a resounding no. And I'm going to pass it off to Jasper, who's going to move us into this next section.
Yes. So just as Gracie said, we're going to lovingly kind of eject you all into the deep end to do a little bit of reflecting, some guided reflections in some breakout rooms. And if you could just go to the next slide, Gracie. Here's what we want you all to sort of think about, right? So we're going to send you off into groups of maybe 3 or 4 people and give you a couple moments to sort of reflect on and name some things that you can think of that either reinforce or are reliant on some of these sort of societal pieces that we take for granted, right? So there's the gender binary, right? This idea that only men and women exist. Heteronormativity, right? Thinking about straightness as the default, and any sort of queerness that exists outside of that is really sort of radically different and unusual. And then this idea also of the nuclear family, right? This kind of white picket fence ideal, or this unit of sort of a husband, wife, and kids, right? And that kind of being the predominant or only real way that like family exists, right? Lots of air quotes around these ideas, but you know, just I'll pause here if anyone has any questions about this or any ideas, but there's really no sort of right or wrong answers for this breakout room. And then we just ask that you be prepared to report back when you return. So any questions before Eli does his Zoom magic and sort of whisks you all away? I think we'll give folks also about maybe 10 minutes. So you have some time to sort of dig into the meat of this all. Okay, sound good? See some head nods. Okay, perfect. So Eli, feel free to open those breakout rooms, and then we'll be in the main room as well too, if you have any questions or comments, concerns. And Eli, you can also pause the recording. Okay. I think we got everybody back. So we're just going to stop slide sharing for a moment just so we can look at each other. But just curious to hear from you all. How did that go? Was that an easy reflection, a difficult reflection? What were some of the things you named? Just to, you know, get your voices in the space, hear a little bit what you talked about.
In our group, we had discussed, I don't know if we're supposed to put this in the chat or someone can speak.
Yeah, feel free to either go in the chat, come off mute. I saw a couple folks come off mute all at once, and then I lost your little squares. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of an honor policy here. See, Erin, your hand is up.
Yeah, so we had a great group discussion. Also, yeah, I'm Erin, she, her pronouns, diversity and health director for a nonprofit out in Framingham, Mass. So we looked at least in the gender category, thinking about gender reveal parties, how there's this this common pull to, you know, blue and pink balloons, confetti, cakes, whatever. We also briefly talked about the magnitude of male-female only bathrooms in businesses and just how rare it is to find gender neutral or family style bathrooms. Within heteronormativity, we talked about you know, treatment of homosexuality as a phase. Oftentimes in the coming out experience, it being, oh, you'll get over it, it's just a phase, you're exploring, and that terminology that's used to address that experience, that vulnerable experience for someone. And then also this concept of othering kind of came up when we're talking about like forms, or if you're filling out a survey, how oftentimes, you know, I hate to bring out the checkbox scenario, but how often, if you don't fit in categories A, B, C, D, you're cast aside as another. And then in the last section, we talked about, still in that paperwork form section, but how in like doctor's offices, you know, if you're thinking about the concept of nuclear family, when you're looking at medical history, it's almost always asked your mother, your father, your maternal history, your paternal history, and not taking into consideration the fact that, you know, in that setting, maybe I was raised by a 2-mom family. So really good conversation. Love my group.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. I saw a lot of folks nodding their heads. And it looks like folks have had really robust conversations, which is great. So in the order that I saw your little hands come up, we'll do Sophie, then Jeanette, and then Greta.
So my group had a really good discussion as well. So we, I talked a lot about how, TV shows throughout history have promoted this idea of the nuclear family. And then we also talked a lot about how until recently, and I'm glad this is the case, there were certain toys that were marketed towards girls and certain toys that were marketed towards boys. So, for example, Barbies and Matchbox cars, and one of the people in my group, she shared how when she was a kid, there, I think she said she and two other girls were obsessed with Matchbox cars, and they were viewed as outsiders.
Mhm. Yeah, I see folks a lot nodding their heads a lot too. As a former Matchbox car child, that really resonates with me as well. Let's go Jeanette and then Greta. And then I see folks also lots in the chat box as well.
Hi, so we had talked about different stages, like doctors were always men, nurses were always women, and a lot of that has changed where we're seeing more male nurses, more female doctors. In construction work, it was always men. And now we're seeing more of a change there. Priests and nuns, are still males as today, and the nuns are still female. So that's something that in religion hasn't changed in certain religions. The one thing that I also wanted to speak out when I was a teacher and I worked, and this is going back a long way, I worked with a male teacher. And I lost a few of my families because they didn't believe that that was appropriate to have a male in a preschool classroom. And they would say, well, as long as you are helping my child and he is not, I will keep my child here. And I couldn't say that's not how a classroom works. Another thing was, I would have a child that had two moms or two dads, and there'd be other people in my class and other parents who were like, we're not comfortable with this, would pull their child, which was very sad. And a lot of that has changed since then. And I'm talking probably 20 years ago. A lot of that has changed, that it's more, hey, how you doing? Great, these are your two moms, great. It's very welcoming. I've noticed more. But it is still, it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle. And slowly, military, I think we were talking about the military and how they're still struggling with that, but it is a little more open, would you say? Yeah. So those are the different examples we have.
Even the kids that are in the classroom.
Even the kids that are in the classroom.
The boys are identifying, which is the normal, which is a female role, but.
Right, yeah, and that's another good example is that I had a little boy, he was 3 years old, who loved to play with Barbies. And the father would be so upset. He's like, I want to play with the Tonka trucks. That's what he needs to play with. He shouldn't be playing with Barbies or shouldn't be playing with the dolls and dress up or things. And he should. What's wrong with that? He's nurturing. Right? So those are the different topics that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I definitely am hearing, I think, a lot of themes around, just from what folks have shared so far, right, around how this sort of conditioning starts at a very, very young age, right? It starts in childhood, right? When we're sort of told what are the different roles that we can take on. And how those get reinforced over time. Sure. So then let's do Greta, and then I will read aloud just a couple of the lots of the rich discussion that we have going on in the chat.
Thanks. So we talked at first about just like the checking of the boxes too on like surveys, or specifically like, you know, at airlines, voting eligibility, like having that gender binary there, and also how sometimes it's worded incorrectly, and how the language that some institutions or whoever is asking you for your information has the terms mismatched or not even like available for you. So it made us question, like, why are you asking if you're not asking in an inclusive way? And what are you going to do with this information? And who has this power with creating or reinforcing language that could be continuing to put people into boxes? And then we kind of brought it back to clothing. Like, clothing is super gendered, you know, oftentimes on the binary, and in stores and everywhere you see, and you know how people you know, choose to express themselves. Like, that's a really easy way to place people in whichever category you could assume to place them in. And then it was more of like politics, law, taxes, like in reinforcing the nuclear family, tax breaks, you know, the pressures of that in order to survive in our society. Like, what do you have to do to get the bang for your buck? And what if you can't legally do that because of the status of your relationship? So that's kind of a summary.
Yeah, see a lot of head nods too. And I think there's a lot of themes too, right? We're just hearing folks talk a lot about not just social pieces, but structural pieces as well, right? Talking about the laws and the policies and the forms and the bureaucracy, right? In addition to some of these more social cultural elements that are reinforced, right? Like the gender reveal parties and, you know, what toys you can play with, right? So it kind of runs the gamut, right? And in the chat box, folks too are uplifting, right, different reproductive health assumptions based on how a person or their partner might present, right, different resources being only available for biological families versus chosen families and those sorts of relationships. Different pieces around, once again, applications, forms, data collection and data fields. Really loving how also multiple folks have sort of named colonialism. That's the next piece we'll be segueing into, actually, is looking a little bit at the sort of the impacts of colonialism and how different traditional or indigenous societies actually have had multiple different gender categories, and how this idea of the gender binary is really reinforced from this sort of white supremacist colonial framework that's not actually true to how a lot of different folks kind of exist, right? Also, lack of intersex options on forms, a lot of talk about sort of the role of media in TV and sitcoms, right? Thinking about how every single like late night sitcom, right, has the dad who works late and the really uptight mother, and you know, like that's a trope. Right? So lots of different really, I think, relevant pieces here. But what I'll do now is I'll pause here if folks have any other sort of thoughts or pieces they want to uplift before I sort of move us next into sort of this historicizing piece.
I would say even in like same-sex relationships, there's always that like innate like, oh, what's the gender role in the like relationships? And it's kind of just like, why does there have to be a gender role? Like, why does there have to be someone who has like the female aspects or the male aspects of a relationship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a lot of folks nodding their heads too.
Yeah, and even just like how you present, like people assume, like for example, I remember my roommate, she is African American, like from college, like she was thinking about getting her nose pierced, and her boyfriend at the time was like, no, you can't do that because you're a light-skinned Black girl, so everyone's going to think you're a lesbian. And I was like, that's not how that even works. So like even just like how you even dress, or if I choose to wear like a button-up shirt and like flare pants instead of a dress to an event, or because it's cold out and it's like 10 degrees and I don't want to wear a dress, I get assumed of like how I operate or like how anybody operates, and it's just fascinating. I think, or important to acknowledge, I should say.
And you're reminding me too, Tia, of I don't know if folks have sort of heard this mantra almost before, but right, non-binary people don't owe you androgyny, right? Gender identity and gender expression are very, very different things. And Gracie will be touching upon that later as well, right? But there's this societal almost coupling, right? Of this is how you look, this is how you behave, or this is what I'm going to project onto you, right? So that's my expectation for how you are. Which is not necessarily true, almost ever, right? So Gracie, if you don't mind just bringing the slides back, I think what you shared there is a really, really excellent segue kind of into this next piece, right? About how other ways of existing exist. They have always existed. And history is written by those with the most power. So it's really up to us to kind of fill in those gaps as to sort of what we're missing, right? And so for this next piece, we're going to start with some often erased context within our environment, right? So thinking about sort of Indigenous identities and that impact of colonization, then sort of looking at this trifecta and these interlocking systems of colonization, capitalism, and racism's impacts. And then thinking about what I think most folks kind of think about as sort of the modern day, right? Like gay rights movements, right? So thinking about Stonewall, the AIDS crisis, and kind of where we've landed today as a result. And so this next piece, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some folks to read the quotes on the next slide. They're a little bit dense, but we're going to unpack those together, and I ask you don't shy away from the challenge. So if I could have a brave and lovely soul, just read this first quote on the top that starts with "language shows."
Language shows that Indigenous queerness in its own contextual realities predates the global LGBT framework, yet Indigenous experiences are rarely perceived as a locus of sexual diversity. This is partly because Indigenous peoples are imagined as remnants of the past, whereas sexual diversity is associated with political modernity.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. Does anyone want to try to take a go at sort of summarizing or paraphrasing what this quote is trying to get at? It's a little bit academic, I know.
It seems that what this is trying to say is that Indigenous ideals of queerness are something that are viewed at as something that happened a long, long time ago, something that doesn't really exist anymore. This is basically a fairy tale of how things used to be and not how things are now. And sexual diversity is really considered something that's kind of new and progressive and something that's very much in the now that we need to tackle now, and is something that's never existed before. These other things we've heard of from Indigenous stories are just stories and not something rooted in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are right on the money, Carla, right? It's this idea that I think a lot of the times too, we hear sort of reactionary or conservative folks refer to as like, oh my gosh, now people are identifying as all these things. And it's like, actually, no, people have identified and existed in a lot of different, beautiful, diverse ways for ages, right? And it's only now that we have this sort of modern political language around, right, LGBT folks, or this, alphabet soup framework. That might be new to you, but it's certainly not new to lots of other communities and folks, right? So it's kind of trying to debunk, I think, some of this idea that all of this is a new concept, right? And Stephanie adds in the chat too, right? And this is still true, right? For a lot of other countries and cultures, right? This isn't a thing of the past, right? This is present, and this is also future, right? And someone maybe come off of mute and read this second quote here: as colonial powers.
I can do that one.
As colonial powers appropriated Indigenous territories, they tried to control, repress, and erase Indigenous sexualities. Colonization regulated Indigenous gender experiences, supplanting them with Western sexual codes associated with Christian modernity.
Thanks, Audrey. Anybody want to also take a go at sort of paraphrasing this piece?
I feel that, I mean, in so many words, basically, when colonization happened and they brought about, you know, this very specific religion, that's kind of when the binary was imposed. That's sort of the way I read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on, Stephanie. Right. And we can even think too, I forget who mentioned this in the beginning too, but right, thinking about how they had mentioned, right, in religion, right, you've got priests and nuns, and right, even that sort of religious leadership is very gendered. Think about what happened when all of these missionaries came over and started to impose that very same sort of you know, gender role and division specifically, right, of expression, of labor, of ideology upon folks, which this just wasn't the case, right? And Kayla adding too, yes, our Puritan roots are definitely showing, right? There's this kind of erasure and sterilization, right, of that sort of beautiful, colorful tapestry. I see Joy, you've raised your hand. Go ahead.
I think a lot of that also goes back to sort of the colonist view, not just of Indigenous people or people who are different from them as being less than, but also their colonists are often coming from cultures where women are viewed as property. And so a lot of the stereotypes, socialization, and structural elements that we see come from that sort of patriarchal viewing, not just people who are different, but also women as less than, and those very constricted roles that are often rooted in methods of control and can be pretty dehumanizing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, 100%, right? 100%. There's definitely a devaluing and weaponizing, right, that happens with gender and specifically with the oppression of anything feminized, right? And in big quotes, right? And definitely uplifting too what I'm seeing in the chat from sort of Jen and Rebecca, right? This is a tool of control. This is a tool of power, right? This is a way to divide communities. And in this case, right, steal resources. And not just steal resources, but hey, it's, you know, settler colonialism. We're here permanently now, right? And we haven't left in the United States, right? We're still here as settlers, many of us. And then Erica also adding too, right? These pieces get internalized and reappropriated by folks who are marginalized, right? And then it becomes this cycle of gatekeeping where we ourselves, right, are reinforcing these roles upon ourselves, right? It's super sinister. It's incredibly, incredibly sinister, right? And so ultimately, I hope what you're all maybe picking up from this piece, right, is our goal in this training and in this sort of historicizing piece isn't necessarily to recite facts at you all, although you might find this helpful or new information, right? And we have resources too. We'll follow up at the end of the training where we can do just that, right? And help color in sort of some of these different pieces, but really to tease apart where our current viewpoints come from and how we can really critically analyze those intersectionally, right? And to sort of really tease apart, like, where is this sort of internalized piece coming from? And so Gracie, if you can just move to the next slide. It's a little bit of a jump in history. We don't have that much time together. But just thinking about sort of this colonial framework, right? Happening in sort of the 1600s, moving through to the late 1800s in the US, right? We think about those impacts of colonialism and slavery, right? This flattening of identities and this forcing of binaries during a period of a lot of unrest and war, right? And war over control of resources, thinking about, you know, in your US history classes, maybe, right, 13 colonies, this antebellum period, the Civil War, where we really, you know, thinking about historically, right, there's been a lot of focus on race, right? And most assuredly there should be. And part of that, right, is this colonial aspect of reducing it to just race. We're not thinking about what's happening to gender. We're not thinking about what's happening to sexuality. We're not thinking about what's happening to all of these different kinship structures that marginalized folks, specifically Indigenous and enslaved folks, really had to help survive this time period, right? There's this huge reinforcement of that nuclear family and of specific white ways of existing, right? When it comes to sort of gender and roles and pieces like that, right? And then there's this slight pivot when sort of industrialization happens that really shifts us to what we think of as quote unquote the modern day with these advances in science and medicine, right? So thinking back to, once again, our history classes, thinking about kind of, right, the roaring 20s, the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, right? And we really see with that industrialism, that capitalism really takes sort of firmer hold and matures, right? Thinking about those robber barons and all these like railroad tycoons and whatnot, we really start to see this consolidation of wealth, right? Which is, I think, a really poignant piece that really is still with us today, right? Thinking about all of these billionaires and how, you know, inflation is currently going on, right? That's really a legacy from this time period, right? And then particularly also thinking about sort of this organized social unrest as well, right? We think about the civil rights era, we think about the women's rights movement, we think about modern policing in particular, right? So thinking about the militarization of the police, particularly in the 50s through the 80s, right? That's kind of the trajectory that we're on right now. And so I'll pause here before I kind of move to this next piece. But are there any pieces from here that really kind of have your light bulbs going off and saying, wow, that really sticks with me, or this is really making me think about this piece of history?
Well, just for me, a new piece of information that is really sticking with me is that once colonialism happened, that's when this whole idea of being gender binary started. And yeah.
Yeah, no, right on, right? And that's a deep historical legacy that's stayed with us, right? That we don't typically analyze or have sort of the room to kind of unpack. Go ahead, Christine, I see your hand up.
My brain just went down a bit of a rabbit hole for like the role of prostitution in these time periods and how women could not stand alone and make an income unless it was in very specific sort of industries. And I'm all about sex work now as a labor sort of job. And there's a lot of true hate for anyone who seeks sex work as work. So now it's sort of this thing that people choose versus back then they had very limited choices. And even still, there's the distinction between consenting to that work and being trafficked. So those are the kind of the things my brain came up with.
Right, exactly. And as Gracie adding too in the chat, right, we all use our bodies in a capitalist society, right? There's this moral element that gets assigned to different types of work. And in particular, right, sex work, I think, being one of those fields where disproportionately, historically, queer folks, queer and trans folks of color have been really forced into, right, as a way to make money and to survive, right? So I see, Rebecca, your hand, and then we will move on to this next piece.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sorry, my camera isn't on. I'm having some issues, but in our breakout group, we actually brought up, I'm in diversity, equity, and inclusion in South Carolina. And one of the things that we're kind of facing is that you hear DEI or anything related, and immediately folks go to race just because of the racial history nationally, but especially, here in this very southern state. And really, you talk about flattening identities and trying to broaden the idea of diversity and equity out from just race, and that these the ideas of intersectionality and how all of these things are related. And that's something that we're really trying to form our basis of the work, I guess, on is really broadening that out a good bit.
100%, right? There's definitely this American racial politics that's at play throughout this whole conversation, right? That really dominates our field view, but should not be limited to just that, right? Because as you said, right, it's all about not just the ways that history has impacted different, Black, Indigenous, people of color, but also gender minorities, folks of different abilities, right? Like there's all of these different pieces that are at play that really has us wrapped up as community around sort of these similar and interrelated systems, right? And then let's see, also in the chat, we have Janine adding, yeah, we could organize a whole separate training around modern policing, right? Stay tuned, actually. I think CHTI will actually have a safety in our communities training that I'm looking at my future co-facilitator, Lauren, at. So if you're interested, come back for that one. But for now, we'll focus on this next piece. So Gracie, if you could just go to the next slide. This is what kind of we, sort of using the royal we here, right? Society sort of thinks that as like the time period with which like we have woohoo, like discovered gay and trans people, right? Looking at sort of moving from sort of this piece around like the civil rights movement, right? After sort of World War II, thinking particularly about, right, how Black leaders really championed equity and self-determination for those communities. And sort of from that historical vein, right, we see a lot of Black trans women and trans women of color leading the charge at Stonewall in the summer of 1969 against police violence specifically, right? I mean, this is the same weaponized and militarized police that was present in the civil rights movement, right, which was, just sort of on the sort of historical wave out, right? Thinking about sort of historically gay and lesbian clubs and communities and community spaces, right, in New York City. We start to see some of these first sort of gay pride marches happening the year after. And then HIV and AIDS really hits kind of in the 80s, right, and starts being labeled as this gay disease, and it really decimates queer communities, right? And we see a lot of queer solidarity happening in this time period, right? I don't know if folks know this, but that's actually why for a while the acronym used to be GLBT, and it got changed to LGBT to actually honor lesbians who were actually donating a lot of blood during the time period to their gay siblings who were being really decimated by HIV and AIDS, right? So there's a lot of queer solidarity that's really happening in this time period to really try to protect each other, particularly around this last bullet point, right? Around police and carceral violence really being a consistent theme throughout this time period, and a piece that I think we're still living with, right? Carla adding in the chat too, one of the things that strikes them is how people tend to really gravitate to social infrastructure that lets them intentionally claim individuals as members of their community and exclude others. And yeah, I'm right with you, Joy, right? There's so many queer elders that were really lost in this time period that has, I think, us as sort of the queer or trans community now really grappling with how do we organize ourselves, because so much of that wisdom and knowledge has really been lost. And that was intentional, right? That was really intentional. There's a reason why the response to the HIV and AIDS crisis was the way that it was. And so not to be too depressed now, there have been some victories, right? And so I just want to transition us now to thinking about where are we today, right? And so feel free to use that annotate function in Zoom that we used in the beginning, but would really love to hear from you all, not just what sticks out to you from this history, but what are some of the things that have happened in queer and trans history over the past few decades, right? Where are we located today? One recent piece that I'll elevate to sort of get our minds in this right headspace, right, is actually super recently we had legislation passed, right, that legalized sort of permanently interracial and same-sex marriage, right? So that's one thing that really happened. But would love to sort of hear from folks, and feel free to annotate, put it in the chat, come off of mute, what's some of the more recent stuff that's happened? We'd also love to hear too from the voices of folks we haven't heard yet in this space.
I can tell you that my son, who's in Brooklyn, he's gay, he can now give blood.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that just came to my mind.
Mm-hmm. In the chat as well, I see legality of same-sex marriage is good, and then removal of affirming care for trans youth in some states, bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we're seeing also more positive media representation that isn't stereotypes. See also on the annotate, we have, despite all the foolishness around bathroom and sports regulations, queer and trans people continue to be who they are and take space.
Something else that happens, I think we're seeing a lot more like openness of having members from the LGBTQ community in higher positions of power, like in Massachusetts are more Healy, and then like other members of Congress that are openly out or trans or what have you as well, which is a big deal.
Yep, we've got more queer and trans folks in politics. Got the Fair Education Act of California. Similarly, as a piece of legislation too, Megan raises in the chat the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. We also have Michaela naming just the general population is maybe more willing to educate themselves on members of our community. Hydra adding RuPaul. So for any drag race fans or drag queen fans, yeah, I think folks are right on hitting it, right? There's a lot we've seen progress on, but that's also definitely still reminiscent of some of these historical pieces, right? We're still in this, we're not in a vacuum, right? None of this is happening in a context completely devoid of these historical systems, right? Ash adding that younger folks are learning usually through their own research and thanks to sort of this widespread, access to the internet too, around this understanding about gender, beyond sort of this outdated binary way of thinking. Bug adding that during peak COVID, gender affirming surgeries were put on hold because of hospitals being over capacity, right? So there's still that medical discrimination piece. Erica adding as well, some states now have X as a gender marker on driver's license government documents. I'm happy to add actually as someone who I actually just this past month, legally changed my name to Jasper after going by Jasper for several years. You can also get X as a gender marker on your passport now, right? On your federal documents as well, right? So, I mean, don't tell the Republicans, but there's definitely, a lot more access to some of these pieces as well. Exactly. Right. So I want you all to, we're going to take a deep breath. We're going to continue along with some of this information in our heads. We are also going to take a quick break now just to get up and stretch before we sort of power through the rest of our training agenda for the day.
Well, there was also
Nope. Okay, so what we'll do now is I'm going to ask Eli to, well, first of all, let's save this annotation, this screenshot. And then whenever you're ready, Eli, we can pause the recording and then we'll just put up a timer for, see, we're a little over time. Why don't we do like a 7-minute break to give folks just a chance to get up, stretch, grab water, do what you need to. And then when we come back, I'll pass it off to Gracie.
Okay, welcome back, folks. Sort of ease us gently back in. You can hear the sound of my voice. And let me just close this cover of September out. But if you can hear the sound of my voice, maybe slowly make your way back to your screens. I know that was not a ton of ample time, but hopefully folks were able to move their bodies and do whatever felt good. Look away from your screen. Maybe you were able to move around a little bit. And thanks for hanging with us so far. So to orient ourselves, it's 11:23 right now. So we have about an hour and 40-ish minutes left together. And Jasper took us through a really, really wonderful history piece and sort of conceptualizing where these concepts come from, right? And like, why are we socialized to think about gender and sexuality the way that we have been? Really important to trace those roots. And we're now gonna slightly pivot, but you know, there's themes that tether all of these things together. And this is now where we're gonna think about these concepts of language and terms and acronyms. And like I said at the beginning, y'all might come to a training like this expecting to learn about the multitude of like terms and definitions that exist under the LGBTQ umbrella, and all of the pronouns that exist, and all of the names and words and identifiers that exist. And Jasper and I like did not want to do that in this training, right? So lovingly, friends, I would direct you all to Google if you have questions about what any part of an acronym stands for, right? Like Google can give you those answers. And I think it's a better use of our time, again, to sort of reflect, do some deep reflection, to think about these terms and these concepts in spectrums, which is really the next piece that I'm going to take us through. But again, welcoming folks back from their break. If you're able to have your camera on, certainly welcome that. And we're going to get back into it. So I feel like here is where we would put all of the terms and all of the pronouns and all of the acronyms for you to see. But I have decided to supplement this with just 2 images, okay? We've got the cute gender unicorn on the left, kind of like a purple little unicorn. And then we've got the genderbread person on the right, this kind of yellow gold genderbread person. And essentially what I want to leave you all with, friends, when it comes to gender identity, right? The way that we present what we feel like our gender looks like, our gender expression, the sex that we are assigned at birth, who we are physically attracted to, who we are emotionally attracted to. All of these things are spectrums and they are not binaries, right? Even if we think sex is binary, it's not, right? Like we perceive, whether from an ultrasound or when a baby is born, we look at their genitalia and then begins the process of their gender socialization, right? Which in my mind is kind of crazy, right? We like are assigning one thing and determining kind of the rest of how we will raise that child, treat that child. The assumption that, oh, I think this baby has a vagina, it's gonna be a girl, so I'm gonna buy pink, right? And I'm gonna like encourage her to do more feminine things. And if I assume the genitalia is a penis, I think it's a boy, I'm gonna give them blue things. I'm gonna let them play with like trucks and guns. But if they go outside of that realm of what we've deemed masculine, we'll get into it. But like, what happens to people when they sort of bend or like go outside of what we have deemed appropriate based on their gender? Does someone want to come off mute and sort of share what happens when people like don't behave outside of what is expected of them of their gender?
They feel shamed.
They feel shamed, right? What else?
Sometimes violence.
Violence. Like you can be killed, right? You're ashamed and judged, but like the extreme is like people get killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't perform within what we have deemed like appropriate for that gender, right? So friends, all of this to say, I think a better use of our time together, you know, I'm lovingly directing you to Google if you want to know about all the pronouns that exist, if you want to know about all the acronyms or labels that fall under the LGBTQ umbrella, hit up Google. I really just want to challenge us all to realize, like Jasper really clearly and explicitly like alluded to in the last piece, these things are made up, right? And there's like no law saying that like this is how it has to be. These are ideas that have been imposed on us, right? And that were imposed on Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. And so we really need to untangle those assumptions and these beliefs, right? And I also want to be clear. Last thing I want to say, and then we'll do a little activity. I'm not trying to say that like every straight person or every cisgender person is like complicit in the oppression of like me and Jasper as like queer and trans people, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. You can raise your kid however you want to raise your kid if you're a parent. What I'm trying to challenge you all is to think about like the socialization and the messaging that we have received about what it means to be girl, what it means to be boy, what it means to be man, what it means to be woman, what masculinity and what femininity really mean. And like, just reflect and think on like, why do I think if I have a girl, I have to give them pink things? Or why if I have a boy, I have to give them blue things? When it's all really made up is what I want you to take from this training. This is all made up. Let me stop here. See if there are any questions, any thoughts, any things that I can clarify before we do another little brainstorm activity.
Well, I just wanted to make a statement, I guess.
Go ahead, please.
I think that what it does is it stunts a child's ability to be whatever it is they could possibly be, and it puts them in a box where, let's say you want to be a nurse. But right now, the way they have still with nurses, it's almost like you have to be a female to be a nurse, and it just puts you in a box where you can't go out of it, and it just stunts you.
Absolutely, we're limiting people, right? Like, I want people to imagine like what exists beyond these confines of gender that we have assigned to people for so long, right? There's a whole other world out there that people can experience. Thank you, Wardison. That's a really, really powerful reflection. See, something came in the chat. Stunts freedom and creativity. Thank you, Greta. Yeah, right on. Anything else that folks want to share? Go ahead, Kayla. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It creates a lot of self-doubt, or, I think folks that don't express themselves the way their gender should, even if they like for me, I identify as she and her. I'm not a girly girl. I'm just not. And so, because I don't fit into kind of those norms, I don't often feel attractive, or that I look right, or that I'm put together the right way or presentable. I always refer to myself as a ragamuffin. So.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. Let's go to Jeanette and then Colleen. I see you came off mute.
Hi, so I was going back to the earlier reflection, even like regarding the nurse. If you have a guy that is a nurse, even going down to as far as them dating somebody, and those parents are like, oh, don't they, he's only a nurse. Are you kidding me? No, that's not good enough. And you're not only making that guy who chose to be a nurse a really amazing job, you're diminishing it, and also bringing your own child down. Whether that's your daughter or your son, you're bringing that child down too, making them feel like, oh my goodness, this is not good enough. Or, those questions from their time when that's what their beliefs were. And that's just not how it is.
Right, Jeanette? And like, what's the messaging with like, oh, a guy who's a nurse, like, why would you want to date him? These are like these random concepts, like he being a man, he can't provide for you, right? Like, that's a feminine job. And this is like what patriarchy, right, makes us think, right? And as much as it's hurting, patriarchy hurts women and queer people and trans people, patriarchy always also really hurts men, right? If you feel like you always need to provide, you need to be tough, you need to do X, Y, Z, that's limiting to men as well, right? So it's like not good for anyone. So really appreciate you raising that, Jeanette. Let's go. I see a lot of hands. Let's go Colleen, Christine, and then Tara.
So I know from my own experience of what I went through as a young woman, and in my family, and being told this is what you do, and you get, because again, I had said in the breakout, I'm a product of I'm a 50s baby, and so you grow up, you get married, you have children, and this is what you do. And then also being brought up in a home with a stepfather who was extremely racist, homophobic. I heard every joke, and somewhere intuitively, probably because of what I was struggling with, that, I said to myself, this is not, it's not right. And this is not what I'm going to believe in. So when I did get married and have 2 kids, I had 2 sons. however, I allowed them to be who they were. You know, if they wanted to wear certain colors, they could. You know, I didn't do, oh, don't cry, big boys don't cry. You know, go ahead, cry, that type of thing. And then when I finally came out in 1989, you know, and now I'm having grandchildren. It's very my grandchildren have never ever seen me with a man. Even though they know their grandfather is their grandfather, it was very, for the lack of a better word, normal to, you know, for, you know, when we all got together and have dinner, you know, there was never any big deal made out of it. You know, my grandchildren were never said, you know, why are you with a woman? Why? It was the way it was, you know. So because it was natural, no big deal was made out of anything, you know. And now where you know, I have grandchildren that are older, that now are saying, you know, Meme, I think I'm, you know, non-binary. I think I'm, you know, this and that. And I'm like, that's okay. That's okay. Be who you are.
Yeah.
You know, not to have this put stigmatism. And I think, you know, this gender assignment, I mean, that's at the fault of the doctors.
Right.
How educated are they?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Colleen. I think you really profound reflections. Thank you for sharing that. And what a beautiful evolution for you to sort of like leave that home that you grew up in and really sort of challenge some of these ideas. So thank you for sharing. Christine and Tara, I wonder, for the sake of time, would y'all mind sharing your thoughts in the chat? Would that do it justice? I really appreciate y'all, and I just want to be mindful of time and keep us moving along. So thank you, everyone, and I'll be sure to read out those reflections. But do want to keep us moving along, and we're going to do another brainstorm activity on the next slide. And I wonder, Jasper or Eli, if y'all wouldn't mind pasting these into the chat. But you know, this is sort of has some themes and some tethers to what our first breakout room, what we talked about, right? Like what are these concepts of gender? Like what do we separate based on gender? And we want to continue this conversation. And then we're really going to get into sort of like a deep reflective piece, and I'm going to offer you up a tool that will hopefully really help you interrogate some of these ideas. And I want to see something that just came in the chat from Jasper, pasting the questions. And again, Christine and Tara, feel free to write your thoughts in the chat, things that you wanted to share. Christine said, I never understood I was bisexual because I didn't understand that what I was feeling was attraction to women/non-binary individuals, right? Thanks, Christine. So on the next slide, we're going to have another blank slide, and we want you can feel free to come off mute and answer these questions. You can feel free to annotate up some of your responses, but we kind of have these 4 questions. So as a society, what do we divide based on gender besides people, right? Like, and some of you have alluded to this, like bathrooms, right? We divide based on gender. Clothes, people have alluded to that, but would love it if people could come up with some additional ideas. I alluded to this earlier and we heard some examples, but what happens if people act or express themselves in ways that don't fit gendered expectations? What are traits we are socialized to believe that people have by virtue of their sex, right? So the assumption that, well, if you're a man, like all men have facial hair, men only have penises, men show less emotion, et cetera, et cetera. And what do these notions or assumptions further enforce? This is like really the important question, right? What are the assumptions? What's it furthering enforcing? Yeah, so let's have a discussion on this next slide. Folks can feel free to annotate. You can feel free to come off mute. And Jasper put what was on the previous slide in the chat, so you can feel free to reference that as well. And I see Sophie put in the chat, going off what was just said, as a political science major in college, I noticed that I was one of the only women at orientation. And because of that, there have been times when I've doubted myself. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sophie. Joy saying, it took me until 39 to realize I wasn't a cisgender woman. I had so many non-binary friends, and it still took me forever to understand my own gender in a non-binary context. Thanks, Joy, for sharing that. Colleen saying, number one, sports. Sports are divided, foods are divided, clothes, movies, interesting, yep. Plants and animals, parenting roles, expecting mother to have different duties or chores than a father. Career fields and majors, right? Like Sophie just alluded to, clothes. Jobs, social work is for girls, mechanics are for boys, okay? Let's see, let me just move some of these around so we're not writing on. Parenting roles certainly are very gendered and very separated. Roles in bedroom and sexuality, that's really interesting, right? And sort of again speaks to some heteronormativity that might be coming out. Demographics, skills and abilities, literally anything, chores, sports, colors, pens, sponges. Did someone look ahead at our slides? Because we're gonna get into that. Women only train car in Mexico City. Oh, interesting. Dating roles, expectations, hair length, criminal legal systems, intelligence, services for intimate partner violence. That's really interesting. I see, I want to be mindful of what's come in the chat. Video games, wages, power. Tara saying most of these comments underscore the importance and power of family and community. I always challenge the athletic norms set for girls, and thankfully this was celebrated. What a different world we have the potential to have. Girls do house chores, boys outside chores. Rebecca saying education. I went to a professor about pursuing my PhD, and he actually said, you're about the age where you want to get married and have children. That will be hard. Yeah, I'm really sorry that happened, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing. Bug saying skills, interpersonal seen as feminine and soft, technical skills seen as hard and masculine. Firearms, hurricanes are gendered for some reason. Thanks, Nico. These notions reinforce, Carla saying these notions reinforce that prior generations made the right decisions. Sophie saying literature, example, fashion magazines versus hunting and fishing magazines. Valentina saying some GYNs in Boston are women, or gyms in Boston are women only. Yep. Okay, cool. Let's clear this. And I actually just I'm gonna stop sharing and maybe we can have a discussion. What are these, thinking about the last question, and I'll paste this in the chat again. What do these notions or assumptions further enforce about people or about gender? Go ahead, Tia, I'm sorry.
It's fine. I mean, a lot of like the comments and stuff, like I agree. Like, I don't know why we're naming like weather phenomenons and female-based pronouns, but a lot of like what I've noticed too, like when we name things, like for example, a lot of time, like when men name their cars or boats or anything, it's often with a female-based name. So it's almost like kind of creating this divide or like kind of reinforcing like the thought and the practice that men have a control over like female identifying people. And like it doesn't help with the whole Andrew Tateisms that's been coming out recently. But on the other hand, a lot of females have been using it to like kind of skirt around and like dodge those bullets. So like we're seeing more of these like men are having these expectations of like 50 like phenomenons and like ideologies with like accompanying like the whole nicknaming and like gender thing. It's a lot of it's like female based names. It's like almost like you have like you're the controllee in like male based names, so like you're the one doing the controlling.
Got it. Thanks, Tia. Michaela, I'll get to you in just one sec. Just want to read what's becoming in the chat. So what do these notions further enforce? We have different needs based on our gender identity, which is not true, friends. The identities outside of the binary aren't real or valid. That you have only two options. And if you don't fit into these boxes, you either won't receive services or it's okay that we discriminate against you. It's further enforcing that gender is binary when we know that it's not. That gender is not a social construct when we know that it's made up. Audrey saying that the sexual organs you are born with reflect the gender identity and expression you should be, right? Y'all, it's all made up. I'm just hammering this. It's all made up. It's like just random and made up. Let's go, Michaela, and then Rebecca.
I was just gonna say, I also find a lot of it just based off of kind of like more so the discriminatory part, how a lot of it is like detaching people from their humanity as well, because, you know, with the example of like men historically naming like their cars and their boats and their whatever after women, or with female names, you know, akinning them to objects, which gives the message that like women are seen as less than men. But I also think it was very interesting how, and this is not like a critique or anything, how it was also brought up that there's a lot of like women only gym or women only spaces in gyms, because I also think it's it's like almost a twofold, because it's like historically, you know, a lot of spaces like gyms have been unsafe for genderqueer people and, you know, like cis women. So there's also part of it where that separation can also be good, because there adds just that little bit of like protection.
Yeah, really important observation, Michaela. And I was thinking similar, you know, there are ride apps that only have female drivers or women drivers. And so another element of safety, if women or trans people, gender nonconforming people, queer people want to take a sort of ride service and don't want to be with a creepy eye, which happens in Uber, it's happened to me plenty of times, you know, I might feel a bit safer with a female driver. It's a really important point. Let's go Rebecca, and then Joanna, and then we will move on.
Thanks, I'll be quick. I just wanted to follow up with the education story about my PhD. So obviously, you know, reinforcing power and gender roles, but the thing that has affected me the most with that situation, and I really struggle with it, is that I did go on to get married and have children. I have 11-year-old and 9-year-old daughters. And one of the things that has, I mean, that and many life experiences, but, you know, girl power, you are amazing, you are awesome, and you can do anything, but it's also focusing on gender norms, right? And like it's a really hard line to walk when you want, in my case, my kids to be empowered, but then like I'm still basing it on very gendered perspectives, if that makes any sense. And it's a really interesting, obviously I do a lot of self-reflection with that, but it's still really interesting how even that gets gendered in our family. And I think it's important, and I think they need to hear it. But I also think that sometimes that can reinforce again the same binary.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Let's go Joanna, and then we'll move on.
Just very quickly, I was chiming in.
Right on. Objectification, property. Yeah, I think you're right on. See a lot of things coming in the chat, and just want to lift up the last two things I see. Erica saying also so much of this can be racialized or tied to ethnicity. I'm Arab American, and in many spaces I have to choose which side of my identity I can share. There are many spaces where it's only acceptable to be queer and hide my ethnicity. And then there are spaces where I can be Arab, but not queer. So there are binary standards and also cultural standards on top of that. And many BIPOC folks can't authentically show up, even in queer and trans spaces. Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing that. I'm sure that I see some nods that's resonating with folks. Ash saying that certain genders are inherently more likely to cause harm or inherently more likely to experience harm. And then that impacts folks' ability to safely access services. For example, many services for survivors of abuse or sexual violence are only for women. And for a long time, the only advocacy day on the calendar for trans and non-binary people was Trans Day of Remembrance, where we honor those we lost to violence this last year. We have an awareness and celebration day now too, but that came about a decade later. Thank you all. I think a really, really rich conversation, and we're sort of like into our next piece, like understanding and sort of tethering that like this is silly, right? Like this is silly. And so I'm going to take us through a series of photos, and then we're going to end on one, which is like kind of controversial and often in the news. And we have some questions that we want to guide you through. So like, why are earplugs gendered? I don't know. right? Why are sponges gendered? I don't know. This seems really silly. This is also kind of sexist, right? Like babies can't even like comprehend what is happening to them. And we are already saying, oh, you're a boy, you're really smart. And the girl, you're really vain. Let's get ready for you to take your selfie. That's dumb. They're like, they can't form thoughts, y'all. I don't know why we do this. It's the fact, right? We all have skin. I don't know why one is pink and one is blue. I think Erin mentioned this earlier. The gender reveals actually send me over the edge, right? Team Ruffles or Team Rifles, right? What are we implying or what are we assigning to someone even before they're born, right? It's determining like what activities I think I'm going to do with them or how I'm going to behave with them or how I'm going to raise them. That makes no sense. Okay, and here's the final one. Haha. All of these were really silly, right? Like this is I can't believe sponges are gendered. That's so dumb. What about the bibs, the body chafe cream? Okay, the gender reveals, I get it. Like that's silly too. Okay, but we land on this. This is silly too when we think about it, right? You all have gender neutral bathrooms in your house, right? This is not a foreign concept. I know I ran through that quick. And I hope it's landing home that like, this is just really random and silly that we do this. But this is important, right? How does something so kind of like silly and, you know, I won't say it's harmless, but it's just silly and kind of like random. How do things like body cream, sponges, earplugs, gender reveals then lead to something like this, right? Then lead to gendered bathrooms. And so we have these questions that we would love to have a discussion about. And I see a lot of things came in the chat while I was going off. So just give me a minute to reorient myself to that. How ironic, I just finished a curriculum with a similar activity for kids. The pink costs more, the blue is bigger. The question, which one is for girls? Has anyone seen those ads for hims and for hers? For hims, like, yeah, medications, and for hers, it's Lexapro and Prozac. I've seen those, Julie. Glenda saying sad, but it is a marketing strategy to make more money. Absolutely. Tia saying, don't get me started on those commercials. Janine saying there are also supplements geared to target groups within advertising. Yep. Nico saying pink used to be the color given to baby boys and blue for girls. Yeah, pink was like what was deemed as like a more masculine color. Renelle saying, and we're so conditioned to this stuff that I don't even pay attention until it was brought to my attention in this training. Yeah, thanks, Janine. Let's see, Kristen, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about a couple of the concepts that you were talking about here for the last couple of minutes. First of all, I'm not sure that all of those products that we just talked about led to the gendered bathrooms. I think the gendered bathrooms have been around longer than the scrub daddy and scrub mommy probably have. But it's all kind of ridiculous in the same sort of category, I guess. But it also made me think about a few minutes ago, we were just talking about how there are some things that are gender specific and that maybe makes people feel safer, and how somebody might feel more comfortable getting an Uber driver who's a female instead of a male because we have concepts about them and because we've made assumptions that this is going to be better than that. And so like a part of this conversation I've been thinking about today is, boy, I'm super lucky that I grew up in a world and a household that I did, because there was a lot of this junk that my parents just said to me, that's junk. Don't worry about that. Don't pay attention to that, and make sure that you kind of call it out what it is when it is. And so I just want to make sure that we're like keeping in mind some of this stuff we're holding up for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kristen. Let's go Joy and then Tia.
I also think that sometimes it ends up being really lazy in ways that can be really harmful, especially in institutional settings, medical settings, things like that. Like if somebody is making assumptions about someone's health based on their perceived gender, they're not as likely to get a full medical record and they may miss things. And I've heard the anti-trans people like hounding on your doctors need to know your gender to give you the proper care, but like if I'm on hormones, if I've had, gender affirming surgery. That's all stuff the doctor needs to know too. And it should be on medical providers to do due diligence when they're doing dosing, when they're recommending treatment, when they're, figuring out what somebody needs, because trans men have babies, non-binary people have babies, they need gynecological care, they need support in medical situations. We often divide diseases by how they present in men and how they present in women, and we don't have nearly enough data about how many diseases present in women to really make educated decisions about treatment, let alone how those diseases present in somebody who is on gender affirming medications and stuff. And I have friends who have gone in and were trans women who the doctors asked them if they were trans men. Looking at the medications, they didn't even recognize, oh, this person is on estrogen. That's an indication that they're trans going one way. And the level of assumptions about gender in institutional settings and how we divide people often ends up just both reinforcing these things, but also hurting people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Joy. Tia, I'll give you the last word and then we'll move on.
I just want to say that I agree with Joy. A lot. That wasn't the only reason why I rose my hand, but however, she did bring up a lot of points that I was going to make. So I feel like a lot of it is just there is.
Oh, sorry, Tia. I think Joy.
Oh, my pronoun is they.
I am so sorry.
Nope, that's okay.
Exactly. But what was I going to say? A lot of what we don't know about the human body is based off of misconceptions. The gynecological experiments that they did on African-American women resulted saying that women who menstruate don't feel pain, ergo kind of turns into this whole the period poverty thing that we're seeing in the United States and other countries right now. And I agree, a lot of it is pretty much just not knowledge or understanding how female anatomy typically works, or even how symptoms do present. For example, if someone who's female does get headaches, headaches can be a sign of strokes, or even switching accents, I guess. It's just a lot of these things that people don't take seriously, or even just simply just going to the doctor's office and I'm above, I'm overweight. So if I present any concerns, it's I just get hit with, oh, just lose weight and stick with your hormone med, da 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 da. So it's and just kind of also the connotation that people who identify as female is supposed to kind of put up with all these and kind of figure out how our symptoms work, when all the symptoms that we know are based around men.
Yeah. Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Joy, and thank you, Tia, for those reflections. I see Bug saying a lot of things coming in the chat. Bug saying, I want us to consider that gender bathrooms can make people feel unsafe as well. And Jasper corroborating that. Encouraging you all to connect these silly ideas that might actually are not silly, right? They can result in violence for people. Tara saying ultra conservatives use fear in many ways. There's this stupid idea that ties gender expression and identity together, right? And those are two different things, your gender expression and your gender identity. A community member in my town actually accused a student working at a GSA bake sale of luring kids with cookies. There is fear that drag queen story hours are somehow dangerous and sexually deviant. It is ignorant and fear driven. Glenda saying our whole life we have been exposed to all this marketing based on stereotypes, so a modification on how we behave and should think or act, it's been imposed even by our own parents. And Jasper saying, also encouraging my trans and genderqueer siblings in this space to pace yourselves. Yeah, thank you for that reminder, Jasper. Jen saying, simplifying gender into binaries makes it easier for people to avoid spending the time to know the complexities of each other and honor the uniqueness of each person. We have to be willing to challenge ourselves to spend more time to get to know each other and push systems to do the same. Yeah, really beautifully said, Jen. Thank you. Okay, let's take a little pause. I'm going to stop sharing and just see how this is resonating with people before we move into the next section. But reflections, feelings, thoughts, pushback, anything coming up for folks? that we want to reflect on in this large group?
There was one thing that we were talking about. I'm unmuted. They're telling me I'm mute. Sorry.
We can hear you. Yep.
That it was anger, like a lot of aggression can come out, but there's also depression. If somebody's not accepted or anything, or feeling really, really bad that they're depressed, they will self-medicate with drugs, or sometimes they can even lead to suicide. If they really feel like it, even to the point that the parents are coming down on the child that's just trying to express who they are. This is how I feel when I'm comfortable, and you should be proud of me for that, and you should be proud of who I am. And when you have friends that don't, when you have family that don't, it just eats you up inside, and you get angry, it can come out aggressively, or it can fall into depression, drugs. I've seen some people, suicide, very sick. But I just wanted to put that out there as well.
I think you raise a really important piece, Jeanette, that when we honor our youth and our young people, the names that they go by, the pronouns that they go by, that is such a protective factor, and reduces risk of suicide, reduces risk of depression, makes people feel like they can come into spaces. That is such a protective factor. And it's something so simple that we can do, honoring people's names and honoring people's pronouns. I know it might feel like a lot of work, but if that's the difference between someone and living and dying, just do it, right? It actually shouldn't take that much work on our end. Jasper, I want to defer to you and see if anything's coming up for you that you want to share.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd love to encourage y'all, I think some of the pieces that I've been hearing too, is to try to think a little bit deeper as well, right? So we're not just talking about sexism here. We're talking about cis sexism, right? We're talking about how this is also the underlying piece to transphobia, right? So just encouraging folks to, as you're making these connections as well, based on your own experience. And it's okay too, right? If you're like, I don't understand how to go deeper, that's why we're in this space as well. But just encouraging folks as well, as I'm sort of hearing all of these different pieces you're bringing into this space around your interactions and experiences and your community's experiences with these kinds of systems and this kind of violence, whether it be, right, sexism, homophobia, racism, you name it, right? The intersecting layers thereof, right? Fat phobia, ableism, you name it. Just encouraging you as we also move into sort of the next activities Gracie has for us, to try to lean in a little bit deeper as well, right? How does this connect for folks who maybe don't even identify with XYZ, right? How is this beyond silly? How is this actively violent, right? Just encouraging a little bit of that deeper reflection as well, too.
Thanks so much, Jasper.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ash. And then Gina.
I work with young people in a sexual violence prevention kind of field, and something that's come up in my discussions with my youth leaders a lot is the fact that regardless of what their actual gender is and how they see themselves, the violence that they or their friends might experience, specifically sexual violence, is going to be filtered through a binary gendered lens oftentimes. And especially for, my students of color, they have a lot of experiences that I too can personally relate to, where based off of both your race as well as how others or people who do harm, perceive their gender, the violence is then gendered, which can be incredibly confusing and just really traumatizing for students, because it's okay, for example, I guess I can just use myself as an example, but I'm non-binary. I don't really feel strongly attached to any gender. I would prefer if I just didn't have one at all. But a lot of the experiences that I've had with, sexual violence or harassment are filtered through a lens of other people perceiving me specifically as an East Asian woman, and then the kind of fetishization and violence that happens at a conjuncture of both race and the sexism. So I think that that's also just something worth bringing up, sort of what Jasper was saying, where it's not just misogyny, it's also specifically having to do with the sexism, and then also how a lot of young people growing up are going to have identities that are not just, I guess, oppressed based off of gender, but there's so many other aspects that need to be considered.
Yeah, really profound reflections. Thank you so much, Ash, for sharing with us. Gina.
Thank you all. Yeah, I was going to name sort of part of my history is working with young people. So we talk a lot about protective factors and how trusted adults are very important for developing young people, and what does that mean to be a trusted adult. And then as a parent of children that identify in the queer community, I often find myself as like a barrier for them. I am so aware of creating space for them that allows them to express however they want, and also trying to create space that doesn't cause harm, like when they're trying to figure out who they are in a way that like deflects some of the other members of our family that are not quite as open. And so I appreciate conversations like this because I'm constantly learning as someone that is not part of the community, right? Like trying to figure out, how do I balance these two things with family that we love and care about, but just doesn't understand, without causing harm to my children, without speaking for them and creating space for them to kind of, it's all kind of like crazy and messy. So I appreciate the space to call us in and really kind of examine all of it.
Thank you.
I haven't
Gina.
figured it out, but I appreciate the space.
Yeah. And it seems like some things are resonating in the chat as well. What you just said, Gina. Joy saying, my mother can't even get my pronouns right. A year in, I wish it surprised me, but she's been getting the pronouns of one of my close friends she met and follows on Facebook wrong for over a decade. Every time I correct her, she claims she'll do better, but then tells me not to bring it up with family because they won't understand. It's very dismissive. Yeah, thank you, Joy, for sharing that. Tia saying, fetishization of BIPOC community members, a scary reality that many people in my life aren't aware of. Yeah, thanks, Tia. So thank you all, y'all. And right, like the gendered bathroom conversation, or the separating or gendering of any of these things, you know, I think it's all great if you all can go back to your offices and have gender neutral bathrooms. That's beautiful. But if you're not like deeply interrogating still your assumptions about like cis heteronormativity, or like male and female, like what you're assigning as male and female, like if you're really not like unpacking that, then the gender neutral bathroom is nice, but it only goes so far, right? And so I really want us to like continue to dig into that. Like we can use you can use the right pronouns, you can like try to be super inclusive, you can have the gender neutral bathroom, but if you aren't like doing this reflective work to really untangle and untether yourselves from these deeply insidious like socializations that have happened to us before we were born, like it's only going to go so far. Okay. And I'm not expecting us to like walk out of here at 1 p.m. and like know it, but I just want to continue to challenge you all to like go deeper. So let's keep rocking. Let's keep moving. The next tool we're going to look at is something that I think a really helpful tool to examine where our assumptions, our biases, our whatever come from. And we're going to use this tool and then apply it in an activity for you all to really reflect on like looking at some photos, looking at some stock image photos, and reflect on like what you think you're seeing might not actually be what you think you're seeing, right? And you might be like, Gracie, I'm really confused. But let's start with the ladder of inference, and hopefully we'll feel less confused as it goes on. Folks, maybe give me a thumbs up or a raise of hands. How many of you have seen the ladder of inference before, know of it, have heard of it, have tried to apply it? We've got Tamaki, we've got Ash, we've got Sue, we've got Jasper, we've got Gina, we've got Eliza. Is there a brave soul that wants to come off mute and maybe like very succinctly try to summarize like in 30 seconds or less what the ladder of inference is?
I can.
Please, Joy, go ahead. Thank you.
It's, you know, our brains are meaning-making machines, and we often don't have all of the facts that we need to truly understand something. And so the ladder of inference is kind of the spectrum of like how big of an assumption, how much are you jumping to conclusions based on an incomplete data set, and then taking action based on that inference. And the less information that you have, the more likely the action you take is not going to actually be the right decision or action based on reality. So like the less curious you are, more likely you are to act out of alignment with what really needs to happen.
Right on. Jasper, I think you and I can like leave it to these good folks to facilitate this next section. That was awesome, Joy. Thank you so much. I think you're right on. And if anyone is still like, Gracie, I don't know what this means or what this is showing me, I'm gonna do my best to walk you all through an example. Some of you might be able to like resonate with it. Some of you probably don't resonate with it, and that's okay. But I want you to sort of think as I'm sharing this example, think of, to Joy's point, there's something else that could be happening at the same time because I didn't have all the facts, right? So let's start on the bottom of the ladder. Before we even get onto the rungs of the ladder, we as humans are always taking in data, right? Like data is what people are saying, what people are doing, what I'm observing in my neighborhood, like the books I read, the podcasts I listen to, the movies I watch, the train I take every day to work, the route that I walk my dog on every morning. Like that is all data that I am taking in, right? And there's like millions and millions of units of data that come into us all the time as humans. And to Joy's point, the way our brain makes sense of it is like we select certain bits of data, right? So say I'm driving to meet Jasper to go to dinner on like a Friday night, right? We just got paid. We're going to have a good time. We're going to have some drinks. I'm driving. The sun is shining. Like I'm driving down the road. It's all green lights. That's all the data I'm taking in, right? I pull into the restaurant. There's a spot right open in front. I put my blinker on. I'm like, yes, I'm on time. I got a spot right in front. I'm just about to turn into the spot. Somebody drives up really quick, drives up next to me, pulls into the spot, takes my spot, right? So from everything that was around me, right? Forget that I was like feeling happy. It's Friday. I was going to have a good time. I just selected that one piece of data of this person who took my spot. What's the meaning? What's the meaning that I'm going to add to this? That guy's kind of a dick, right? Like, does he not know how to drive? I draw a conclusion. He's probably done this before. He's probably really entitled. What's the action I take? I drive up behind him, roll my window down, flip him the bird, say a few choice words, right? And then try to find another parking spot, right? That's what the action I took is. How long do you think that happened? That whole interaction happened? Like that. I see people snapping their fingers. Like less than 5 seconds, right? From all the data that was around me, I selected that one piece of data. I added meaning to it. I drew a conclusion about this person, and then it allowed me to take action, right? Now imagine this kind soul gets out of the car and he says to me, I'm really sorry. I saw that you had your blinker on. My wife is in the building next to this restaurant and she's pregnant and her water just broke and I have to take her to the hospital. Whoa, I didn't have all the facts, right? Like now who's the asshole? Me, right? But something else was happening at the same time, friends, that I didn't see because of the way my brain filters and selected that data and added meaning. Something else was happening at the same time, right? And so this is really like the crux of the ladder of inference, that multiple things can be going on at the same time, right? But the way that I'm socialized, the way that I was brought up, like if you have your blinker on, like people should respect it, right? Like that's a value that my mom instilled in me as a Massachusetts driver, like use your blinker and like hopefully like people will respect it, right? So that's something that I value. Like if you see me putting my blinker on, like you should know I'm going to turn into that spot. And so I think this person's entitled, full of themselves, like doesn't care about other drivers on the road. And those are things that I grew up and was told to like not value, right? Like respecting other drivers, like honoring people's blinkers. Those were things that were important to me and that my mom taught me growing up. So we can see how something so harmless, like allowed me to take action, select data, add meaning, draw conclusions, and like the snap of my fingers, right? So that's a very basic example, but I wonder if there are any reflections from folks, thoughts, ideas. Christine, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
I've never seen this image before. I super love it. What super stands out to me is that only 2 legs of the ladder are in this data circle. And like, if you have all these assumptions based on a shaky foundation of incomplete data, that's going to make ascending this ladder even more problematic, and also even kind of relying on data in and of itself. Like, a lot of studies that I learned about in college are all based on college students and westernized sort of environments. And so even then, it reminds me of this podcast called How to Think About Science, and how each discipline thinks they're the expert in whatever they're trying to convince people of. So this is tremendous. This is like the favorite thing I've seen today.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Thank you for sharing that, Christine. And I see folks putting in the chat, meaning making machines, love that. Joy saying, even the gendering and the assumption, right? Like, maybe that person does not identify as a man, but what I have been socialized to think of, like how he was dressed, how he presented. You're right on, Joy. And Joy, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we all tend to think we're much better at judging what's going on in other people's heads than we actually are. And we all tend to spend much more time thinking about and assessing what we assume is going on in somebody else's head, what their motives are, what kind of a person than they are, than we do paying attention to our own thoughts and what's happening inside of us. And often the conclusions that we draw about what other people are doing and why are really inaccurate, because you can't actually know what's going on in somebody else's head.
Right.
You can only know what they tell you. So and
yeah, we can't assume anything, really, as much as we think we can. Yeah. Let's go, Wardison, I'll give you the last word and then we'll move on. Oh, and I think Wardison might be frozen. Oh, there we go. All right, go ahead, Wardison.
It's Wendy, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. Thanks, Wendy.
You know, Christine brought something, I didn't pay attention to this, but just like she said, the ladder that we see that's in the brown, but look at the ladder that's in the back. And that's just more information that we're not getting in the back ladder. But then look at the shadow from the back ladder. You have even more information that you could be getting.
Yeah.
Because the shadow also is
right.
Yeah.
We're only seeing what our brains are choosing to see, right? And there's a whole other story or narrative that's going on that, and for whatever reason, you know, you heard me say, like, I was taught, my mom taught and instilled these values about like using your blinker, respecting drivers on the road. Our values also inform our ladders, right? And like, we could have done 3 hours just on the ladder. But based on our values, like, we filter and choose to see like what we actually want to see. So great observation, Wendy. Thank you. And I see Gina saying, when introducing the ladder, we always say it's easier for someone to see someone else go up their ladder. It's much harder to see ourselves going up our own ladder. Yep. And Sophie's saying it wouldn't hurt if everyone in this world could have a little more empathy. Joy saying curiosity is a great thing to cultivate. Beautiful. Thank you all. So we're now gonna like put our ladders of inference to the test, okay? To Joy's point, like, we're always making assumptions and think we know people, but we only know if we ask, right? I can't assume people's gender. As much as I think I can assume someone's race, I can't as well. I can't assume anything about someone unless I talk to them and I ask them, right? So we're gonna put our ladders of inference to the test now, and we're gonna look at a series of images. And I would love it if folks could like grab some good old like pen and paper, or you can feel free to write this on a note on your phone if you don't have access to pen or paper. And maybe Jasper or Eli will also put these questions in the chat as well, so we have access to them. But we're now going to look at a series of images as a group. And for you all, I want you to write down, what are you seeing? Okay, so feel free to write down your thoughts, your assumptions, your reflections. They're very basic images, okay? And these are kind of the 4 questions that we want you to reflect on in thinking about these images. So how would you describe the image, right? And like your ladders are going to be going off, whether you realize it or not. What assumptions are you making about what is in the image, right? Based on like cisgender heteronormativity, queerphobia, transphobia, like whatever else has been instilled in us and how we've been socialized to think about these issues. What information did you add that may not necessarily be true, right? Other things could be happening, other things could be true. And describe how you walked up your ladder, and conversely, how you walked back down your ladder. So those prompts are in the chat. And Gail, I see you have to jump off, but thank you so much for being here. And we're just going to take like 10 to 15 seconds to look at a series of about 4 or 5 images. Okay, so we're going to start with this image. You have about 15 seconds to write and reflect on what you see in this image. Thanks, Hope. I see you need to leave. Thanks for being here. Give folks about 5 more seconds to sort of reflect on that first image. All right, and Tia, feel free to write your own reflections down, like on a piece of paper, in your phone, whatever. Let's go on to the next image. Give folks about 15 to 20 seconds to reflect on what you see or what you think you're seeing. Okay, about 5 more seconds. Okay, on to the next image. About 15 to 20 seconds to reflect on what you see in this image. What are you seeing? What assumptions are you making? Okay, about 5 more seconds. Our second to last image. What do you see? What assumptions are you making? How are you walking up the ladder? How are you walking back down the ladder? About 12 more seconds on this image. Okay. And then our final image, about 15 to 20 seconds to write down what you see. Okay, about 5 more seconds. Okay. So we wrote some assumptions. We reflected on what we thought we saw. And now I have some questions, and maybe Jasper or Eli, if y'all wouldn't mind putting these in the chat, and then I'll stop sharing so we can see everyone's face. But wondering how that felt for folks. What did you notice about your ladders, and maybe ladders of others if people share? And ultimately, like, what assumptions were we making from these images, right? Stephanie's saying, I'm assuming everyone is queer and possibly trans, but that could be my own lens. Multiracial families may be blended, biological, or adopted. Thanks, Stephanie. What else? Like, how did people walk up their ladders?
Well, first in terms of what I the way I walked up my ladder is I looked at the image and I said, okay, basically, what are we seeing? So, for example, with the image of image of a Black woman shaking hands with a white man, I said, okay, that's literally what that's basically what we're seeing. And then based on that, I made my assumptions. So I said, maybe the woman is going for a job interview or something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Right, and that's what you're seeing, right? That's your ladder, and maybe that wasn't a woman, right? Maybe that was someone who didn't identify as woman or as male or as anything beyond in between, either, none, right? We also assume we think there's a man in that photo, that must be the boss, right? Offering the woman the job, but maybe it's flipped, right? Like maybe she, which is an assumption, she's the CEO and she's offering this other person a job, right? There's so many assumptions that we're making just from that. I saw someone had a hand, and then it went away. I'm sorry, I missed who that was. Bug, go ahead.
My hand up, but you kind of just said what I was thinking, which is like maybe the person with the white shirt was actually the CEO. I feel like the person that was wearing a suit, you could think that maybe they were at a like a higher level in the company, but who knows? Because sometimes I feel like if you're like a feminine expressing in like a corporate world, like you feel you have to like wear like nice stuff, but then you earn like a certain level of respect and then you like don't have to do that, which is like kind of what I'm embodying right now in my work.
Awesome. Thank you, Bug. Right on. So see a lot of people, Sue, I'll get to you in 1 minute. See a lot of people thinking it's families, a lot of people saying, yeah, I assume gender, but then walked back down. Concept of like, is it a family? Is it a caregiver? I made the assumption that the adults were helping the children. Definitely assume genders in the boss picture. Glenda saying I went down faster than up by being more empathetic and understanding that we are all the same with the same right to choose and live our lives, right? And to not have assumptions made about us. Janine saying when examining each image separately, use different assumptions. Colleen saying I didn't think about gender, just welcome to the company. Interesting. Valentina picture number 6, it looked like a couple and their adoptive daughter, but it could be like they're all friends or family members, right on. Ash saying they assumed or hoped the children in the pictures were happy and safe. Thanks, Ash. Let's go Sue and then Jeanette, and then we are going to exit this activity.
Hi, Sue, she, her pronouns. I think thanks to this morning, and what I realized before, as you were talking there, was probably I went up the ladder and then came down the ladder, and I was more conscious of my descent, in the sense that I thought to myself, I don't know what I'm looking at here. You know, are these siblings? Are these families? And in the end, as I came back down the ladder, I just, for instance, in one picture, just thought it's 2 adults and 3 children, and that's about all I can say about it. You know, because I think I came to this exercise almost not wanting to come, you know, making obvious assumptions because of what we've been doing this morning. So, and that's really me coming back down the ladder in a way, because I'm being conscious of that, because I'm sure there was a part of me when I first looked at the first picture, for instance, I thought, oh, possibly a couple with a child, but maybe also siblings or just friends. But my first thought was possibly a couple with their child. And then I went to options, because that's what we've been trying to encourage each other to do this morning. But I did feel by the time we got through the end, I didn't know what I was looking at beyond the obvious, you know.
Right.
So
thanks, Sue. I think that's a really powerful reflection. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at until I ask people. Really is a really great lesson. Jeanette, I'll give you the last word. Maybe hopefully 30 seconds or less. Summarize.
Okay, I'll make it quick, I promise. So the first one we thought was, they said the happy family, the mom, the dad, the child, but then we went back and just started thinking, well, this could be the uncle, or this could be the dad, and that could be the sister, or it could go even deeper than that. We would, we started just questioning some more, into it. There was the other one where it was two women with how many kids on the porch? Three kids on the porch. And we thought, oh, they were adopted, or these were sisters. Also, they could have been a daycare. It could have been something completely different. It just kind of opened our eyes, like, yeah, this could be a step we don't know what they identify as.
Right. Those people might not. Those people might not be men or women. They might not identify as either of those. Right. So that's like really, really deep, right? Like, even not assuming like, oh, it's a man and a woman and maybe they're not married. Like, those people might not identify that way. Right. Because we're like, they might, or they might not, right? They might be friends and they're like, that's their youngest sibling. Like, we don't know, which is the point I'm trying to make, right? And I love that you all kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I really encourage you to continue to do that, right? And ultimately, we can't really assume anything unless we ask people. And I do want to be mindful of time, and I'm going to pass it over to Jasper for our last activity. So just give me 1 second, Jasper, to bring this back up.
Yeah, no worries. And I appreciate everyone's really lively reflections thus far. Would also encourage too, if you don't know the gender of a person, to try to stray on the side of maybe using gender neutral pronouns if you're trying to make, just to check yourself, right? If we're not assuming as we walk up and down these ladders together, right? And now this last activity that we have in our last half hour together might seem a little bizarre. And I'm asking you all to kind of try to approach this with a little bit of a leap of faith and a little bit of a blank slate now as we walk into this next one, right? So far we've covered just some history components. We've talked about sort of checking those assumptions and biases, language, socialization, this ladder of inference. So this next piece is going to maybe seem a little bit weird, but I'm asking you all to sort of take all of these other activities we've done today thus far, put them to the side for a little bit, and try to approach this next activity with a totally blank slate, okay? So for this next activity, we're going to send you off into some quick breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you all to design your dream office together in your breakout room, right? So you're going to be given a link to an editable Google slide deck. Just grab, whatever slide, and we want you to make a mood board of your dream office or workplace, right? And really just pretend that you have an unlimited budget. You can afford whatever the hell you want in your office, and use Google Images to select and copy paste what you would like to see in this office. Just keeping an eye on time, I think we'll do maybe 10 minutes instead of 15 minutes. But on this next slide, I can show you sort of me and Gracie's dream office example, right? We've got office dogs and plenty of natural light and equitable pay, and like a barista setup and, little nap cubbies, right? So this is sort of our dream office, but would love to sort of see you all develop your own dream offices in some of these spaces. So what I'll do is I'm putting the link to the Google Slides in the chat. So just feel free to open those, particularly because I don't think you might lose the chat when we move you into breakout rooms. But feel free to open that up, and I'll pause here if folks have any questions. I know a bunch of folks have to hop off a little bit early, but I'll wait here if there's any questions about this activity before we whisk you away into your breakouts to design your dream office. Okay, I'm going to take this silence as a no. So Eli, whenever those breakout rooms are ready, feel free to send people off, and we'll give you about 10 minutes before we drag you back. I think that should be everybody, but let us know if you're having any trouble moving into the breakouts. Eli, you can also pause the recording here. I'll put on for put on your sort of dream office mood boards for this activity?
I'd like to put up a disclaimer for group 5 that had we had more time, we would have focused on the work we needed to do rather than just the amenities.
Duly noted, no worries. Do you want to share for group 5 what y'all have so far?
Sure. So yes, certainly the example you provided for us early on led to more conversation about the napping possibility. So therefore we found the highest tech pod for rejuvenation we could find, the gender neutral restroom, the ability to have coffee prepared by a barista, I might add, since money was no object, and it needs to be pet friendly. And in this case, if the pets do the work, even better.
A plus, Audrey. Definitely hear you on the pro pet agenda. I see Carla adding in the chat. Our group discussed the need for natural light, comfortable spaces to make connections, calming music. Loving Colleen's group. No office at all. Any other groups want to share? Would you all sort of put on your mood boards? See, landed on physical items, but also time for preparation for services, as well as time for documentation, less focus on results or products and evaluation of programs, right? So kind of leaning into almost the process more than this like deliverable heavy due date culture, for sure.
I can go for my group 6.
Sure, sounds good. Take it away.
So equal work, equal pay. That's the first thing we all agreed on. And then Tia mentioned having a door because the current office does not have a door. So lots of windows with a beautiful view, colors inside the interior of the office, and definitely full functioning coffee bar. And then sleep pods. I found this image, so like separate privacy room for workers if they need to do anything. And then multiple monitor screens, so don't have to go back and forth between laptops.
Yeah, I love how natural light, beverages, and equitable pay are like the consistency throughout all of these offices. Any other thoughts?
I was in Colleen's group with Jacqueline, and this is honestly a very challenging exercise just because I've never really had the type of job that gave me my own office, a lot of working class sort of positions. So even that exercise in and of itself, it was like this very I don't know, I feel like everyone kind of took it to just have this beefed up office with all these amenities. And I'm thinking like I wouldn't even know what to do with an office because I don't know what it feels like to be able to afford to decorate something like this. So a lot of like internalized classism came up for me doing this.
Yeah, appreciate you uplifting that. And that's super valid, right? I think I'll speak for myself, right? I myself, as like a remote worker for a nonprofit based in Boston, have my own preconceived idea, right? Going up my ladder, right? To bring that back, right? Of what I envision as an office space to be, or even access to an office space, right? So appreciate you uplifting that. There's definitely different access to resources that different organizations and jobs and careers historically have had that aren't always the case, right? Just point blank. Yeah, and I see Ash, your hand.
I was with group 12. The first thing that I immediately thought of was having a labor union. I started thinking about benefits first and then space. We also talked about wanting to have lots of natural light, having plants, aromatherapy, a fireplace, just having like a really cozy, comfortable space. I also put in free healthcare and paid family and medical leave. I definitely want to echo what was said earlier by Christine, where, you know, my thoughts first went to kind of like worker protections and then a little bit later to space. Because I think like amenities are great. But as somebody also who like is coming from a background where I've worked a lot of jobs where there's no worker protection whatsoever, that's kind of where my first thought went to, was like, okay, how can I make sure that, you know, as an employee, I'm being treated safely and fairly?
Yep, I empathize a lot, Ash. And I really appreciate how I think you all really leaned into this activity, uplifting both those structural elements in addition to the sort of, you know, maybe the fluffier surface level amenities, right? Because that's always kind of the joke in nonprofits and a lot of places too, right? It's like they'll give you a pizza party and then you'll like, but I need like healthcare, right? Or whatever those kinds of dichotomies are, right? And so just encourage you all in our last couple of minutes together here to think a little bit about some of the meta, right? So why actually did, you know, we have you do this activity in this training, right? So, you know, encourage you all to sort of think about these two questions, right? Do you feel safe or comfortable in your dream offices or dream workspaces? And what did you notice about the things you included, right? Why, just generally, why did we make you do this, right? What was the point of this activity? Any thoughts?
Well, I think that change starts with imagination, and daring to imagine better possibilities. So it's always good to have a nice little vision board brainstorm.
And I see Erica putting in the chat that this was supposed to be my $1 million reveal, but Erica, I feel like you're stealing my thunder a bit. Right? All the things that made you feel valued, safe, and respected have nothing to do with gender or expected roles, right? These are things that transcend all of the different categories we you know, assign to each other. And then Jen, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I just feel like, you know, to kind of go off of what some folks were saying about the work settings that they've actually been in, is like the office gives us a place to, like, it's like a container for those ideas of, you know, what is a legitimately you know, defined space for people to be their most contributory, I guess is the word. I don't know if that's what I'm trying to say, but, you know, if we want people to contribute as much as they can in the world, the workplace container is something that we can look at in terms of how do we take care of those needs.
Yeah, right on, Jen, right? It's authentic, and most importantly, it's not forced, right? You're allowed to come as you are, with whatever needs that you may have, and your value isn't solely placed on your labor or the roles that you take on, right? That's sort of the ideal that we really want to lean into here. And then Carla and Tia adding in the chat, seems like a lot of us made spaces that we wouldn't have to leave, right? It's really shocking how, from Tia, how experiences shape our wants in these activities, right? From going from your last job that just didn't give proper breaks or bathroom relief. And then Megan adding too, I don't know if this was the intention, but it helped me see the privilege I have in not even thinking of certain things because they haven't been barriers for me in life, right? So you sort of take it as a given, right? And sort of the drum roll that, you know, I kind of was hoping to land with, and Erica named, right, is that nothing you included in your dream workplace was really gendered, right? As far as I know, there's no sort of gendered assertion, and when it comes to like nap pods or, you know, coffee or what have you, right? But also thinking about the structural supports, right? Nothing here is gendered. So when you're thinking about how to uplift queer and trans folks, folks with disabilities, right? Folks who speak different languages, et cetera, thinking about that accessibility, I think, through the lens of how do we uplift and make all of us feel safe and really push back against some of these preconceptions, I think is a really, really core aspect, right? Because as we're thinking about safety, not even comfort, right, but safety, right, and the spaces that exist to be able to help support us, we really need to think beyond, right, all of the fun baby bibs and, you know, scrub daddies or what have you, right? It goes deeper than that, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking about things in a really liberatory way, I think is ultimately kind of the point I want to make. And so as we come across our last sort of 5 minutes together, just kind of wanted to thank you all for hanging in for this long 3 hours, and just wanted to kind of pause here and offer you all up in closing, just to hear a little bit about sort of what you all might be taking with you from this training space. And then we can also offer up sort of Gracie and I, like our contact information as facilitators, and then some more information about the Community Health Training Institute. And then we also have a feedback form too, which would be super lovely and ideal if you had the chance to fill out, just so that this way we can continue offering these sorts of trainings to folks for free, and to really be able to sort of refine the content that we have. So I'll pause there. I don't know if Gracie, you have anything you want to jump in and share sort of as final words, my super fun co-facilitator here, but.
No, I'm just really grateful to you all. You know, like Jasper and I joked, we came in with like our super queer agenda and like we want to shift everyone's mind by the end of this training. But I think, you know, I think there was a lot of reflective, like deep reflection, and I just want to continue to challenge folks, like really, really go deep. Like, yeah, like if we've experienced like cisgender, myself as a cisgender woman, if I've experienced sexism, that's real. And there's also like other components of like queerphobia, transphobia, classism, racism that other folks are experiencing too. And like really, really go deep and challenge ourselves. So, but appreciate you all and the deep work you did and hanging with us for 3 hours. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks folks. I'm seeing in the chat lots of warm and fuzzy feelings, which I definitely echo back to y'all. If we could just go maybe to the next slide, Gracie, or maybe it's the following one, just so folks have the information if they want to stay in touch. And you know, I'm happy to sort of linger on this call too for a few minutes afterwards if you have any questions. But that last slide is Gracie and I's contact information too. So if you want to reach out or if you have any ideas about the trainings. But otherwise, yeah, would really love if you all had the opportunity to fill the feedback form, and you know, we're here as resources. So